I will unmute myself. This is so fascinating. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on OMAH's first ever Zoom presentation. And we love to do this in person, and we hope that we can do that sometime soon. So this is what we've got to work with now. So I think we're all getting used to it, and so hopefully not fatigued, and we'll continue on. Our board member, Don Phillip, has graciously agreed to manage all things technological for this presentation, and momentarily we'll review some of the basic features of this presentation format. Following that education, it will be my pleasure to introduce Wil Kucey, who will share with us a virtual view of the watercolor by Franklin Carmichael, Old Barns Miners Bay, that the museum hopes to purchase. And then following Wil, I will introduce Mike Hill, who will present a history of Franklin Carmichael. And lastly, we'll share a brief video of Doug Frost, who was interviewed by Philip Jackman, and why he thinks the acquisition of the watercolor is so important, not just to the museum, but to our community as well. And there will be an opportunity to pose questions to our speakers, and Don will explain how we are going to take those questions and how we will respond to them. And the brief Q&A will be conducted after Mike's presentation. So over to you, Don.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nanette. I'm showing up here. I don't know if you can see me on the screen. Nanette, am I center screen or am I up in a corner? Oh, I'm center screen. See,
Brady bunched over to the left.
Yeah, okay. Brady Bunch over to the left. So hi there, everybody. It says OMAH Communications, and that's not my real name. I'm Don Phillip. And I'll briefly explain what we're doing here, how we're doing it, and why, and talk about some of the controls. I won't take very long over it. So we are in what's called a Zoom webinar. And a webinar allows for panelists who can talk among each other, but typically the microphones are muted for everyone else because this can take up to 1,000 participants at a time. And if everybody starts talking at once, it gets to be completely uncontrollable. Right now we have the microphones muted, but what I'll do, because we don't have a really large number of people, is I will unmute the microphones when we come to a point where we can do a question and answer. If for any reason that isn't working, and one of the big reasons that that happens is ambient noise, like dogs barking, police sirens going by, smoke alarms going off, children screaming, all of the above at once, it can make it impossible to hear what's going on. So that's why we mute the microphones, not because we don't want to hear from you. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see on the left, there is a mute button, and you can mute or unmute the microphones. I've actually set it, or at least I think I've set it. Again, it's hard to tell, but I've set it so that you can unmute yourself if you want to. And you can show or stop your video just to the right of that. So if you don't want us seeing you, you can turn that off. I'm reminded of the old days in the Jetsons TV show where they had video phones, and Mrs. Jetson had a mask that she would hold in front of her face when her hair and makeup weren't right. Apparently people are actually doing that now. To the right of that is a participants window, and you can do certain things in there depending on whether you're a host, an attendee, or whatever. To the right of that, it says chat, and there's a chat space. Some of you have found that already, and you can post in that chat space anytime you want. And I will monitor it during this, and I will try and reply to you if you have any questions like that. Share screen, attendees cannot, panelists can, and all panelists should now be able to share. I thought I'd have to switch you to hosts, but I don't. I've clicked on the magic button that allows all panelists to share screens. Polling, if we have a question we want to vote on, we may try that. Recording button, I don't think you have that. Then a question and a button, which is just for questions and answers that you want to ask. So if you come up with a question and you're afraid you'll forget it for the question and answer part, post it there, and we'll try to come to them in order when the speaker is finished. And then the more button is just that. There's lots more you can see there. And then if you have to leave, there is an end button. You can quit that and leave at any time. And at the top right, there's a view button that will show you a speaker view, a gallery view. Depending on what you have set, you'll see different things, and you can change to full screen or not. And depending on the size of your device and various other things, that's what you'd want to do. So that's all from me. If you are having trouble for any reason, let me know in the chat space and I'll try and deal with it. And I'll turn it back over to Nanette.
Thank you, Don. So first up, it is my pleasure to introduce Wil Kucey. Wil is a consultant with Canadian Fine Arts, and he provides expertise in both historical and contemporary Canadian art. And prior to joining Canadian Fine Arts, Wil had his own gallery for about 15 years on Dundas West. So thank you for joining us this evening, Wil. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Lynette. I'm really excited to be here. I don't get to meet with too many groups. You know, the gallery life can be quite solitary. We get a few visitors a day, but we are surrounded by great works, and excited to share one that one of your members, Doug Frost, was able to spot as well. So you can see behind me, I have the Franklin Carmichael hanging. We bring it out every so often to take a look because we continue to realize how great an example it is of Carmichael's work. As you've seen, it's titled Old Barns, Miners Bay, and was painted in 1925. With many of Carmichael's watercolors, there is often signature and date in the bottom corner, which certainly helps. And so we're glad to see that one on this one. It's always a nice stamp of approval and authenticity. 1925 was an interesting year for Carmichael. It marked a point where he decided that perhaps his practice should focus on watercolor. I haven't read too much about why that decision was made, but it was clear that he was going to become one of the masters of watercolor in Canada. Here at the gallery, we work with artists all the way back to Werner and Krieghoff, and all the way through to contemporary artists like Kim Dorland and Wanda Koop. And Carmichael holds up with all of those artists, if not at the top of that group consistently. 1925 was also the point where buddies at the Arts and Letters Club said it's time for us to start an association, and they formed in that year the Canadian, I'm just gonna check to make sure I get this correct. Mike and I were talking about this, Canadian Society of Painters in Watercolor. And there is a possibility this was one of those inclusions in that exhibition. You know, as with many works that we come across, we try to glean as much information from the labels that we find on the back. And in fact, Abby Lyon was listed as one of the original owners, and I think a lender to an exhibition. I was able to track Abby Lyon back to her husband, and his name was Henry Sharman. He was a lecturer at U of T at the time, interested in agriculture to a certain degree, so there may have been a connection. He was originally from Stratford, and you know, this would have been acquired for a shocking price. Mike will follow up on that at the time. And it stayed with the family. We believe that when Sharman retired in 1933 out to California, this piece went with them and has lived in California up until just last year, where it was returned to Canada. And we see with a number of the provenance mentions that it had been by descent through a number of those family collections. As I said, there's no doubt Carmichael was the master of watercolor and was often mentioned as somebody that was the go-to for hints and tips and tricks to master the technique. In my practice as a dealer of contemporary art, half of my roster at my gallery were artists who work on paper. And there's a unique authenticity that comes with making marks on paper. And I often say that my favorite artists are drawer painters. So artists who have mastered drawing and mastered painting. Now working on paper adds another level to that because of course every mark that you make on that surface stays there. You know, we often talk about Riopelle and his giant oil canvases. You know, if he didn't like something, he would scrape that layer off and start repainting. But with Carmichael, it had to be considered, and there was a whole lot of commitment that had to go with that. And so in the piece behind me, you can see that there are many graphite marks that exist as well on the paper. I'm just going to try to set up my screen share here to see if the image will come up. Is that screen share showing for you guys?
Yep.
Great. So in this, you can see the graphite outline that would have been produced prior to laying down that watercolor. So a quick sketch where you can see the outlines of all of those elements. And what's very unique about this stage of painting in Canadian history is that we were just starting to see the use of negative space in painting as a tool. So the idea of leaving the white of that paper in the elements of the trees, a little bit in the hills to allow it to function as the highlight was very special. We had seen David Milne experimenting with this in his New York years, and it was fascinating to see it carry through. You can see lots of the sketches from the group at the McMichael collection as well, employing this same technique where they allow a little bit of the board to peek through. This was a major no-no for many of the Impressionist painters. You know, they said it's not a finished work, you're not there, but it's come to define this kind of era of Canadian landscape painting. I was happy to hear from Minette and from Doug that a friend of the museum has been able to locate this, the site where this was painted. So there are some great archival images to go along with this, and I'm excited for that to be shared to go along with this piece when it starts to be exhibited. And we're looking forward to seeing it up there as well as it's being exhibited. I'm just going to switch back here, talk a bit about how we came across this piece and what we do at Canadian Fine Arts. We're a gallery that has been in business about 45 years. Michel Biguet, the owner, also has a gallery north of Montreal in a town called Saint-Sauveur. And there's a major connection there with lots of artists who pass through. And Michel has been building a network of contacts for those 45 years to help Group of Seven Works find us at the gallery. We're buyers and sellers of art. And so it's a constant flow of work that's coming in and going out the doors, always hoping that it finds that right home. And we're happy to say that this is easily one of the top watercolors from Carmichael that we've had through the gallery. We've handled a number from the La Cloche Hills area. We have also sold a number of significant canvases by Carmichael at the 24 by 30 size and larger. And that's of course about 10 times the value of this work. But there's something unique about how contained this piece is and this reflection of the mastery of watercolor for Carmichael. What I'm enjoying about this process with Orillia and this opportunity for you to work on this donation is that for us at the gallery, collecting is all about stewardship. And being a dealer, it's all about stewardship as well. We're never owners of these artworks. We're simply guardians who help to illuminate the stories and the histories that go along with them. And that has always been the drive for me in my education of going through art and telling the stories of artists that are out there. So I'm really happy to see that this is happening for us as well. We work with typically private collectors. The majority of our collectors are based in Canada, but anywhere from coast to coast. But we do also support a number of museums. Whenever they send us their list of what they're looking for, we often look to seek to find those pieces. So we've made a number of acquisition assistances with the Quebec Museum recently as they build up their Beaver Hall Group collection. And we also loan works from what we consider our collection. And so there was a major bourgeois exhibition that was out there, and I think we had 6 or 7 of our works were loaned to be able to tour for that. I do have to thank Doug Frost. He was part of spearheading this process to be able to get going, and that idea of stewardship is what I value so much about Canadian art, and of course connecting it with the stories. I grew up in Port Hope, an hour the other way from Toronto, and experienced my first Group of 7 works there with collectors who lived in town. And it was great to piece together where all of these things had come together to connect with the collectors. So I'm happy to offer this as an opportunity to grab a piece of cultural history located, or connected to Orillia. And I hope that the Carmichael finds its home there. I think this leaves a legacy for generations through donations. You get to enjoy participating in the community to allow this to be acquired. But what it does for younger people like me is to inspire that idea that collections can be left for a legacy of a community. Whether it inspires young watercolor artists to try to attempt to copy this work, or senior watercolor artists, I dare you to try to master this technique as well. What it does do is connect people with the places that they live and the histories that are there. And that's something that I think I value the most. So thank you for having me. And I'm hoping that my next experience with this is on a trip up to Orillia where I get to see it on the walls there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Wil, and thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences, again, with Canadian art, but again, with the group of 7. And look forward to installing that beautiful watercolor with our selection from the juried art show, the Carmichael Canadian Landscape Exhibition, Tradition Transformed. In fact, I was just working on finalizing the selections today, so I'll be announcing the artists that are going to be participating in that exhibition from across Canada. And that exhibition will be installed in the last week of September and opening October 2nd. So this will be exciting to plan with you. And now I am excited to introduce Mike Hill. Born and raised in Orillia, Michael was a school teacher and a trivia contributor for over 30 years to the Toronto Star. That was a fun fact I got to learn from Mike's bio and from Phil Jackman. He's been a ghostwriter for Isaac Asimov, Pierre Berton, and Charles Templeton. And when the Mariposa Folk Festival returned to Orillia in 2000, he volunteered and became the festival organizing chair. And then in 2007, he became the artistic director, and we are so appreciative of that experience here. He was responsible for hiring and scheduling musical, dance, and spoken word acts of that annual event, and which we greatly missed this year. In 2017, he published The History of the Mariposa Folk Festival, which is a seminal book in my opinion, and inspired our Mariposa Folk Festival exhibition that OMAH hosted in 2018. I got to work with Mike on that a little bit. And now he is prepared a presentation about Franklin Carmichael and his lifelong fascination with the group of 7 and his fellow Orillian, Franklin Carmichael. Welcome, Mike Hill, over to you.
Thanks, Annette. I guess I should start sharing my screen. So for all the people who are listening in, watching in, I hope you'll bear with the technical aspects here. So I think, there we go. There, now is everyone seeing that that picture and hearing me okay? Great. Okay, the reason I've done this, I started doing some research a few years ago about Carmichael. A lot of the other group of 7 members had their own autobiographies, or they'd had you know, like Thompson, for example, he must have had 6 or 7 really in-depth biographies written about him, just because of his mysterious death and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, well, maybe, you know, something should be done for Orillia's own Carmichael. And there is a little thin biography of him, but I thought maybe he deserves something deeper. But anyway, I have not continued it, but I did do a lot of research into Carmichael, so that gave me a little bit of expertise. And when I heard about this, that we were acquiring this this painting, I thought, well, I could offer my assistance and give a bit of a history. So that's what this is all about. So there's a picture of there's a picture of Carmichael at 3 different stages in his life. 1911 over on the left, about 1930, and then close to the end of his life in the 1940s. I include, this is one of his more famous paintings, Autumn Hillside. One of the first ones that was shown in the very first group of 7 exhibit, probably one of his best known paintings anyway. And then I always like to find quotes about artists that sort of says something about themselves. So there's a quote that he wrote for a lecture he gave in 1937. So, starting at the beginning, Carmichael was born in Orillia, May 4th, 1890, so he would be 130 years old if he was alive today. Orillia at that time was, it was rapidly growing. Orillia was actually bigger than Barrie at the time. And I mentioned that it's on the edge of the Canadian Shield, surrounded by farms, lakes, and rivers. The reason I said that is because all those things were important to Carmichael as he was growing up. So as a young boy, as a budding artist, those outdoor landscape type of elements were important to him. At the time, the largest employers in Orillia were the Provincial Asylum and the J.B. Tuddup Carriage Works. And Franklin's father actually owned a smaller carriage factory in town. The Carmichaels lived on Scott Street, and the house is still there. It was close to downtown, stone's throw from Lake Kucey. That is the house present day. It looks like it hasn't been updated too much from when Franklin would have lived there. And I think to myself, you know, if he was an American artist of his reputation, there'd be at least a plaque out front, and probably it'd be turned into a museum, and we just don't seem to do the same sorts of things for our artists in Canada. An important person in Franklin's life was Canon Richard Green, who was the Anglican church minister. He was also the model for Dean Drone in the Stephen Leacock book, Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town. But he was a very, very real person to Franklin, because he founded something called the Orillia Sketch Club. Franklin became a member. And he gave Carmichael private painting lessons. There's still a little bit of evidence of Canon Green's artwork in the Anglican Church. He carved a giant eagle lectern, and it still sits in the front, very prominently in the Anglican Church. The earliest known work from Carmichael is the little watercolor that's to the left there of it's called Plums on a Table. And I'm sorry that I wasn't able to find a color reproduction of it. But he did that about 1905, so he was 15 years old. I think that's pretty impressive. It kind of showed the kind of promise that he had. He also did, you know, the seated figure there. Apparently he was rarely seen without his sketchbook, and he was often, you know, seen walking the back roads looking for things to draw. He was also quite musical. His mother insisted on he and his brother taking music lessons, so he learned how to play the mandolin, the cello, piano, flute, and he kept at it too, because even later in life he was playing the bassoon at the University of Toronto Symphony Orchestra. Bassoon is not an easy instrument to play either. As a teenager, his father employed him and his artistic ability as a striper, painting at the family carriage works. And it wasn't just, you know, plain straight stripes. They would do fancy curlicues and that sort of thing, but really not the kind of artwork that someone with his talent wanted to spend his life doing. So at age 20, Franklin set off for Toronto. And he ended up working at a graphic arts firm called Grip Incorporated, where he was just the office boy initially. But it was there that he met a lot of the other artists who became the Group of Seven. MacDonald was the boss for a short time. Tom Thompson worked there. Varley and Lismer, when they both moved over from England, started working at Grip. And the men, you know, obviously talked among themselves, shared what they were doing in their private and in their work, the work environment. And also at the same time, Franklin enrolled in evening art classes at the Ontario College of Art. On the weekends, a lot of those people, the same group, would take their families. They would go on little painting, sketching trips. And don't be misled when it says the upper branches of the Humber River. Where they would go was mostly to what we know as Weston, the area around 401 and 400 where they come together, that was still very much a wilderness area. And that's where they would do a lot of their weekend painting. At that time, artists in Canada, even the most radical ones, really felt there was a need to go to Europe to learn technical, traditional type of training. And like Lauren Harris, for example, spent 4 years in Berlin studying art. Varley and Lismer had both been, they both grew up in England, and they had gone to the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Antwerp, Belgium. So in 1913, Franklin decided that he was going to go there, obviously being influenced by those other two older artists. And the painting on the left is just one, but it's obviously showing a very much a European cityscape, as opposed to something from the wilds of around Orillia. The problem was the war started in August of 1914, so Franklin's studies were cut short. He made a brief little trip to England to visit his fiance's relatives over there, and then returned to Toronto. He tried to enlist in the army during the war, but he was turned down on, all I could find was minor medical grounds. I assume it might have had something to do with his eyesight because he always wore glasses. But fortunately or unfortunately, he stayed in Toronto, and he and Tom Thompson shared a room at the studio building. I assume a lot of you would know about the studio building. It was built by Lauren Harris about 1912. Harris had lots of money. He never really had to work for a living. His family owned the Massey Harris Farm Implement Company. So he had money to spend doing things like building an art studio building for all his artist friends. Thompson lived there for a number of years in a shack behind the building, actually. But anyway, he and Franklin and Tom Thompson shared lots of ideas about art. I know Thompson was very influential on Franklin, and I'm sure Franklin had some things to offer him, considering his training over in Europe. Carmichael also admired Thompson's skills as an outdoorsman, and he had actually planned to go camping and painting with Thompson up in Algonquin Park, but was unable to. And sorry, I've forgotten the reason, but he missed out on a trip with Thompson, which probably would have been very influential. But you can see from that painting, it looks very much like a Thompson painting, especially the sky in the background, very similar to Thompson's dabbed on oil painting skies. In September of 1915, he married his longtime fiancée, Ada Went, and they moved to Thornhill, which was at that time just a small town north of Toronto. And then Frank got a job at Rouse and Mann, which was another printing house downtown Toronto, and he would commute down Yonge Street every day. He was really a 9-to-5 worker through most of his life, unlike a lot of the other group of seven. He did have a little brief time where he tried to start a business with his cousin in Bolton, but the only work that they could find was painting, striping on carriages, but for a funeral parlor. So obviously did not suit his talent. Again, he spent weekends in Southern Ontario, a lot of it near Orillia because he still had his family here. And by 1916, he was gaining a reputation as an artist in Toronto. Hector Charlesworth, who was the art critic for Saturday Night Magazine, actually had some complimentary words to say about Carmichael at that point. He said that he was a promising young man who will do good work when he finds himself. Charlesworth was not so kind to the group of 7 a few years later, but that's one of his pictures called Sumacs. And you can see that it's very much Canadian landscape as opposed to being, you know, the European style of painting of, you know, windmills and cattle on a farm. This is the most famous picture of the group of 7. The only one missing from it is Carmichael. Now, I've often wondered if, well, maybe he was the photographer. He was the youngest member of the group when they eventually did form in 1920. But he was also removed from them. A lot of them painted together. They went on long trips up to Algoma and north of Lake Superior. They had gone to Algonquin Park. And he had been more committed to his job and to his wife. So he actually didn't make a sketching trip with the other group members until 1925, a number of years after the group had actually been established. And then I've written a little note there that Tom Thompson would, of course, would have been a member of the group. They would have been the group of 8, I guess, if he had not died tragically in 1917. This painting is called A Tangle. And if you know MacDonald, he did one called A Tangled Garden. I think there was a bit of a, you know, little influence maybe on each other there. And it says it was likely part of the group of 7's first exhibition. We say likely because Will and I were talking about this before our meeting. They would change the names of paintings as they put them in different exhibitions, or as they would go into different galleries. Sometimes the names would be changed. So Autumn Hillside, for example, was part of the first group of 7 exhibition, but it was originally exhibited as something called An Autumn Landscape. I liked this little detail I found out about Carmichael. In that very first show, he had a painting called November, but it remains unlocated. So it's one of those mysteries of Canadian art. And I always wonder, you know, is someone going to find it at a garage sale and pay $10 for it one of these days? Just an interesting little sketch of Carmichael done by Arthur Lismer about 1920. They seem to like to draw each other. I've seen other pictures of the other artists as well. The group of 7 was not an overnight success. A lot of the critics really found their work just too radical. And, you know, they used words like abominations and the hot mud school. But they were all pretty determined to you know, to paint what they saw of Canada very differently from, say, an artist like Homer Watson, who painted, his paintings could easily have been, you know, done in the south of France or the south of England. They were undaunted, of course, and they produced some of their best work in the 1920s when they were being harshly criticized. Autumn was their favorite time, not just for Carmichael, but for all of the group of 7. And, you know, it's so obvious in Canada with the colors that you find in the fall. The one on the left is called Autumn in Orillia, the other one Autumn in the Northland. Really bright color, and I think that's part of what made their work radical at the time. Franklin painted incessantly. He made trips close to home. His second house was, he lived right near, and again, I'm just hoping people are familiar with Toronto, where the 401 and Yonge Street meet. That's called Hogs Hollow in the Don Valley. And Franklin was just a stone's throw away from that. And so he would just walk over to the valley. And in those days, it wasn't all developed. And he could find lots of subjects to paint. He made a trip in 1923 along the Severn River north of Orillia and produced a number of works then that were shown in what was called the Ontario Society of Artists Small Pictures Exhibition in Toronto. Some of the titles of these groups and of their exhibitions are long and convoluted, so I'm not sure why they did that. And then Will touched on the fact that in 1924, he made a critical choice to return to watercolor. One of the reasons I think might have been to just differentiate himself from Jackson, from Harris, from MacDonald. Again, I'm just speculating on that. I don't really know. And that little painting shows some of the other things that Will mentioned about the use of negative space, the white paper, for example. And when I was doing this exhibition, I didn't know that the actual painting that the gallery that OMAH is getting is the old barns at Miners Bay. But I just found the picture and I thought, wow, I like that picture. And then I also found out that the asking price back in 1926 was $35. And even with an inflation calculator, I don't think that would be more than a couple of $100 nowadays in 2020 money. But he formed in 1925 the Ontario Society of Painters in Watercolor with a couple of other artists. He finally made his first northern sketching trip in 1925 when he accompanied Harris and Jackson up to Sault Ste. Marie and then along the north shore of Lake Superior. And there's the example that I said he chose to work with watercolor, probably to distance himself from the other two. But they often pick the same subjects. So Harris may have sat side by side, painted the same thing, but Harris would be working in oil and Carmichael in watercolor. That's obviously an oil. And I'm assuming that people probably know this, but the artist would go out into the environment. They would do little sketches and then come back to their home studios and maybe through the winter would work up larger canvases in oil. The group started to show in the later 20s, they started to show internationally. And like they had a fairly large exhibit at the British Empire exhibition in Wembley, England in 1925. And then also in 1926 in Philadelphia. I've never been able to find out whether Franklin actually traveled to England or traveled to Philadelphia. I don't believe he did. But the showings included several of Franklin's works. Harris was a great influence on Carmichael, artistically, spiritually, intellectually. And there's an example of, the two people painting basically the same thing. And you can tell Harris really stripped down the environment in a lot of his paintings. I'm not speaking as a great art expert or anything like that. I just sort of know this from having seen a lot of his pictures and read a lot about him. He stripped things down, and it looks like Carmichael was trying to do the same thing at that time. A couple of pictures of Pick Island, one by Harris, one by Franklin. And then, of course, all the groups of seven visited the Georgian Bay and painted that area. That's probably what they're maybe even best known for. Their patron, Dr. McCallum, had a cottage on one of the little islands in Georgian Bay, and he let Jackson stay there for months at a time, and I think he invited the others up at different times to come and visit and to paint. So I've included some pictures of just a little bit of comparison there. Lismer, Varley, Jackson, Thompson. There's that Thompson sky with the dabbled paint. He returned to the North Shore again the next year, and this time he brought his friend A.J. Casson, who had just joined the group of seven. Frank Johnson left the group, and Casson was chosen to replace him. Casson was much, again, even younger than Franklin, and worked with him at Rouse and Mann. These guys would live fairly ruggedly. They would take a train up to a certain point, get off the train, and then they would live there, just living off the land for maybe a couple of weeks at a time. Wasn't your luxurious provincial park like we have nowadays. The older members apparently treated the two, Casson and Carmichael, as neophytes. They were not experienced campers or anything like that, but they admired and respected their artistic skill and their curiosity. And then after that trip, their camping skills, of course. They became lifelong friends. So they inspired each other. They worked together. They both really specialized in watercolor more so than oil paints. Carmichael's 1926 painting of Jackfish Village shows his mastery of watercolor. And again, Will mentioned about how you have to commit with watercolor. You can't really, it's very hard to fix any kind of little error or any little thing you want to change. So very detailed painting. And the thing about Carmichael was he started to paint fairly large watercolors, which again is not an easy thing to do. It tends to be a very small medium, but he was an absolute master of it. The group never really became wealthy from their artwork, initially anyway. In 1927, he sold his North Shore Lake Superior for $850. That was the highest amount of money that he had ever earned for a painting. And I went on an inflation calculator on my computer, and I found that in 2020 dollars, that would be about $13,000 now. So even $13,000 for one of the greatest artists Canada's ever produced is not a lot of money for, he wasn't earning a lot of money for his paintings. The group began showing more and more in the States and across Canada and became more and more accepted. And a lot of Carmichael's work in the 30s was characterized by a real focus on light, shadow, a lot of sky and clouds in his paintings. He actually considered this painting called Cranberry Lake, one of his masterpieces. It's rare. It was eventually sold. When I say it was rare, I mean it's like rarely seen. It was eventually sold to the National Gallery in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I went on their website. I tried to see if it was still there or not. I assume that it is. I don't know if it's traveled back to Canada very often for any of the retrospectives, any of the shows. In the 1920s, he became fascinated with the La Cloche district, which is an area southwest of Sudbury, just directly south of Espanola. It's close to Georgian Bay, but it's an area of kind of mountains, small mountains and lakes. And Franklin eventually bought a cabin there in 1935. And I've said here, he matured as an artist. He was mastering his own style. He was financially secure. And he found a place that really suited him. And that's where he tended to stay. He didn't travel to the Arctic like Harrison Jackson or out west to the Rockies to paint out there. He tended to stay either in southern Ontario around Toronto, or else more and more increasingly as he got older in the La Cloche area around his cottage. There's the cabin that he built. This is a photo of Frank with his daughter Mary at their Cranberry Lake cottage in around 1935 or so. And he took this photo looking out across the lake, and it just sort of suits him perfectly, I thought when I saw the picture. Big sky, lots of water, lots of trees in the distance, lots of contrast there. Too bad it's not in color. His day job was working on really some of the better known art firms, commercial art firms in Toronto. He worked at Grip and then Rouse and Mann, and then finally a place called Sampson Matthews. And his specialties were to do wood engravings. So he was like the the two pictures on the left are both prints. He would have carved that out of wood and, you know, put paint, run a paint across the wood that had been carved, and then you put the paper down on top of it. Or it's a little more detailed than that, but I think it's amazing. It's kind of working in a negative negative space, and I mean negative in a good way. He also was very, very good, and I think this maybe stems back to his days as a carriage striper. He was very good at doing fancy lettering and all that scroll work going down the side of that poster for our Christmas play. He also illustrated book jackets. He did ads for magazines. I'm sorry. And posters. He even dabbled in ceramics and furniture design. The book cover there on the left, and the mock-up of an ad for, I think it was for men's underwear. He wasn't one to draw people or paint people too much, but you know, these are a couple of his better-known commercial art ventures. The Maclean's cover from 1928, very typical of the, you know, a woman of the day. The poster in the middle was for a CNR travel brochure for Lake of Bays. And then the CNE poster actually won him an award. When I look at it though, I tend to think of, you know, Soviet Union propaganda from the 1930s. But anyway, this is a picture of their home on Cameron Avenue in North Toronto. It was near Yonge and Sheppard. It's been torn down since. It's replaced by an apartment building. But he had a home studio there, and it was kind of it wasn't a suburb. It was he actually looked out onto a farm across the way. But he worked a lot in his home studio doing his wood engraving. And I apologize for the picture on the right. That was as clear as I could get it. It was a what's called a Washington press, and it was a hand-powered device for doing print making and lettering. So I think he did a lot of his, looks like he did a lot of his commercial work at home. You know, like most artists do, he sketched everyday things. He did sketch his wife a little bit. He tried experimental things, like the picture in the lower left is an etching, where you actually burn images onto a metal plate. And the Christmas card for 1939 there that he sent out, I think he was starting to dabble in some abstract ideas. I know Lauren Harris certainly had gone almost completely abstract by that time. So they kept in touch with each other, even though they weren't close friends, but the artists still communicated and shared ideas. During the 30s, he began to include more evidence of human presence in the northern landscape. Instead of just drawing trees and rocks and clouds, he did show a lot of houses, a lot of work along the Magnetawan River and that area south of Sudbury. A couple of pencil sketches. In 1932, he left commercial art and he accepted a job teaching at Ontario College of Art, which is now known as OCAD. And apparently he was a very, very popular teacher, very patient, very much an expert, and you know, especially when it came to things like watercolor. But he seemed to have a good handle on how to do a lot of different kinds of art. And he was teaching, you know, commercial arts, so he could rely on his experience of the previous 20 years. The National Gallery, well, especially the curator there, who was Eric Brown, from like 1910 until 1939. He was a real fan of the Group of Seven. He bought a lot of their paintings early on. And the National Gallery really promoted the Group of Seven. In 1936, they had a retrospective of their paintings, and that was a big deal. So Frank, of course, submitted a number of works. Autumn Hillside, of course, Mines, Cobalt, and Northern Silver Mine, plus that one Silvery Tangle. He never did too many portraits, but apparently his wife knew that he had the talent for it. And she approached a neighbor to sit for a portrait in 1934. And then he sort of let it go, didn't do it for several years. And then again in 1939, he painted someone else. And this is believed to be one of the secretaries at Ontario College of Art. But for some reason, he didn't ever exhibit these works. And I found a quote from David Silcox, who's an art historian and author, and he said he wishes that Carmichael had tackled more portraits. I do too. I think this woman, for example, has a very Mona Lisa type look to her. During the Second World War, gasoline rationing really limited everyone's ability to get around. And it certainly restricted Franklin from going up to his cottage too much. So he chose subjects closer to home. And apparently, like I said, this is an orchard that was just outside his window that he could see from his home in Thornhill. I really like this picture myself, just my own personal opinion. They say that the human eye can see more shades of green than any other color, and I think he's got about 45 different green colors in that one particular painting. He has great mastery of perspective and color, that's for sure. As he got into the 1940s, he was getting to be a middle-aged man, and I don't think he was going middle-aged crazy or anything like that, but he told his wife after one sketching trip that he was finished with landscape painting, didn't want to do it anymore. And then he started to branch out into doing abstract work. This one was called Gambit Number 1, and is supposed to be, an interpretation at least of landscape. And it was done in 1945, so it was probably one of the last works that he ever completed. He died of a heart attack suddenly while driving home from Ontario College of Art on October 24th, 1945. He was only 55. Didn't seem to be overweight or anything like that. He was a smoker all his life, so maybe that had something to do with his heart disease. He is buried along with his wife and daughter at St. Andrews and St. James Cemetery in Orillia. There is a historical plaque honoring Carmichael, which is located between the library and the Opera House. I'm sure a lot of you have seen that. In 2012, a special $20 coin was struck by the Royal Canadian Mint to honor Carmichael. Looks like one of his northern villages that he had painted. And then this year, because it is the 100th anniversary of the Group of Seven, Canada Post has issued commemorative stamps. And I think they've chosen some really interesting pictures of all the different artists. So that brings us back to Old Barns at Miners Bay. Carmichael, he had a short life. He was a little bit different in personality from the other members of the Group of Seven, but I think his work stands up with the best of any of them. And that's it for my presentation. I'm not sure if any of you have questions or.
So
Back to you.
we need to take questions. People need to either post the questions in the chat space, the question and answer space, or I need to unmute everybody. I don't know how we want to proceed with that. Shall I, go through and allow everybody to talk, or Nanette?
Yes, I can
Okay.
talk.
No. Well,
It looks like there's a question I see. Where is Miners Bay? Asks Sheila Davis.
Maybe Will would know that better than I do.
So my best guess at it, I mean, Doug actually may be able to chip in on this one as well, but my understanding is that it's in between Minden and Kinmount as a location. And I think, Nanette, you've seen those photos of the location as well. So I'm sure that's something we can add to.
Yes, so the Waddingtons, who were supposed to present at our annual Carmichael lecture in May, travel to all the locations. They travel by canoe and they love finding the locations, speculating where these locations were, where the group of 7 have painted. So we sent them the painting, where Miners Bay was, and they were so excited, and they have the archival photos of where Miners Bay is, near Minden, Kinmount area, and they will be happy to share more information about that at their October presentation. So stay tuned for that, but yes, Minden area.
I'm happy to answer any other questions if anyone has anything to say.
Janet Houston has a question. I've unmuted you, Janet.
I did send a question in the chat box, and it was, Mike, is your presentation going to become a book?
That was the original idea when I started doing my research on Carmichael. Was I thought he deserved a book, and I got partway through it. And I've kind of gone on to a different project instead. But I think I'll probably come back to it. This is kind of energizing. This is kind of exciting me about it again. So thanks for asking, Janet.
Thank you.
So does anyone else have questions? I don't see any hands up in the chat space, in the question and answer space, and I don't see anything new on chat.
I think there is a question for Nanette at the bottom of the chat there.
Oh yes, from Stephen Davids. Remind us how much it costs and how much we still need to raise.
It's coming, but I was waiting for questions for Will and Mike. But if maybe that is the burning question everybody wants answered. So first of all, I want to thank Mike for that presentation. I love hearing, always learning something about the group of 7, especially Franklin Carmichael now. And I can never get tired of it because there's always something new to learn. So my thank you for sharing. I'm sure everybody learned something new about Carmichael's career and his experiences and how diverse he was in his art making practice. Again, I didn't realize he was even a printmaker. So other than in his commercial life. So we will be sharing some of his Christmas cards that we did acquire that we received for the collection close to Christmas time. So this is gonna be all things Carmichael this season, so coming up, so great. So now the burning question. So I'll just lead into it a little bit about what the Matching Funds campaign is about. So in August, we launched our Matching Funds campaign to help purchase Old Barns Miners Bay. Half of the cost of the painting, $20,000, was committed by OMAH board member Doug Frost. And to date, we have received over $1,000 in pledges. So that's pretty exciting. We're halfway there to meeting our goal. And a big thank you to those who have pledged so far. And we really, truly appreciate that commitment from our friends of OMAH and friends of Orillia and the arts and heritage community. We are confident that we'll achieve the goal. Wil has given us a generous timeline, I think until about mid-December to achieve that goal. Funds pledged and raised above the $20,000 will help create an acquisition fund so that in the future, should other significant objects or artworks come onto the market that we feel would benefit the museum and our community, we'll have some funds to be able to make those purchases. And put us in a position as, again, having a significant and increasing the significance of our collection. So this could not have started without Doug Frost. And we're just going to play a little bit of a video. So Phil Jackman interviewed Doug Frost, and he told us why he initiated this campaign for OMAH. So Don, you can cue up the video.
I'll start screen sharing now, and while I'm doing that and getting that ready, this should answer some of the questions that people had about why that particular work. And
hi everyone, my name is Doug Frost. I'm a member of the OMAH Board of Directors. I joined OMAH about a year ago.
sorry, apparently people couldn't hear the audio, so I am going to rewind this and try again. I think you'll be able to hear it now.
Hi everyone, my name is Doug Frost. I'm a member of the OMAH Board of Directors. I joined OMAH about a year ago. And it's one of the reasons I was interested in OMAH was it's a very vibrant, active museum. When people think of museums, they think of something with pictures up on the walls, the same all the time. OMAH's anything but that. It's a place with ever-changing exhibits. It celebrates both the arts and the history side of Orillia. We've got hands-on programming on the third floor for children, adults, seniors. We've got ever-changing exhibits on 2 floors within the gallery, focusing on various different themed exhibits through the year. We'll occasionally bring things out of the collection downstairs to showcase some aspect of Orillia's history. We've had some great shows on the industrial past, Doro Wrong, Taco. So it was a great organization to get involved in. As I was sort of returning to Orillia, I was born and raised here, but it's from about 1977 till 2000, I was working in Toronto. So we're back here full time now and happy to be engaged in the community. One of the aspects of a museum like this, though, is that we've got an opportunity to showcase the arts history of Orillia, the painters of the past who lived here, and develop that through our collection as sort of iconic pieces that draw people in. So one of those artists is Franklin Carmichael, who was born and raised here and was buried here, a member of the group 7, especially well known for his watercolors. So about a couple of months ago, I got an email from a dealer in Toronto, Canadian Fine Arts, who was putting on a show to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the first showing of the group 7. And one of the pieces they had was a watercolor by Carmichael, done in 1925, called Old Barns, Miners Bay. Now, Miners Bay is over towards the Minden area, and it features a showing of sort of half tumbled down barns, typical Ontario picture, very vibrant watercolors, really nice example of Carmichael. It was purchased years ago, showing in Toronto, and spent most of its life in California. So this is an opportunity to bring it back home. And what I'd like to do is assist the gallery in acquiring it. So what we've proposed is that I would donate half of the funds required to acquire the painting, and I would match donations from the community. So that I think would allow us to acquire the painting. The cost would be approximately $40,000. We're hoping the response to the community is very positive, so that we not only could acquire this particular painting, but we could also start a collections fund. That's something OMAH doesn't have. Other major museums have developed collections funds, which would allow us to continue to monitor the environment out there. Where we find a piece that really fits into Orillia's history, it would allow us to go out and attempt to acquire it. So establishing a collections fund is another aspect of this. The next aspect of this is we'll get more information out to the public in the fall. The arrangement with the dealer is that they'll hold the painting for us, and assuming we can raise the money, we'll be able to acquire it in mid-December. We hope to have the opportunity to show it here, perhaps for our annual general meeting, perhaps during the Carmichael landscaping exhibit in the fall. It would be great if we could borrow the painting, show it here, and that would assist with fundraising. So over the last few months, obviously, we've all gone through a very difficult time with COVID-19, shutdowns, and the hardships that go along with that. So I hope this campaign is viewed as a way of kind of celebrating the past as we re-emerge. The town opens up again, the art gallery opens up again, and we hope this is a way to celebrate the history and show that we're moving on and to another phase, really, of OMAH's evolution.
Hello, there we are. Hi. That concludes our presentation this evening, unless there's any questions after that video that we just shared with you. Yeah, so everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, thank you, Will. Thank you, Mike, for sharing your knowledge, your experience, just everything with us this evening. Questions could arise and we will then share them. Will be joining us again 1 week today for our annual general meeting. He'll speak again about the painting, and we hope you can join us for that. And at this point, just to let you know, the fundraising committee members will be reaching out to our participants and attendees this evening just to say thank you and and continue the good work. So thank you, everyone. We are excited about this opportunity and we hope to achieve our goal. So thank you for participating.
Thanks.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Nanette.
Thanks. Thanks, Janet. All right.